So finally from me, I'd like to introduce our final speaker. Stephen Attenborough is taking people to space, literally infinity and beyond. Redefining what long haul means, and Stephen is the commercial director of Virgin Galactic, which is well on track to become the world's first passenger-carrying commercial space line. So before you welcome Stephen to the stage, I'd just like you to see the video he's provided, and if you could run that video now as his introduction.
The exploration of space will go ahead, and it is one of the great adventures of all time. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Many years ago, the great British explorer George Mallory on Mount Everest was asked why did he want to climb it. He said, because it is there. Well, space is there, and we're going to climb it.
Okay, Neil, we can see you coming down the ladder now. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Virgin Galactic is on track to become the world's first commercial space line. And if you have ever dreamt of joining the incredible group of pioneering astronauts, your opportunity has arrived. During your adventure, you will accelerate to a breathtaking 3.5 times the speed of sound. Then, in the silent tranquility of space, you will experience weightlessness and views of our beautiful planet that will change your perception of life. A uniquely experienced and knowledgeable team of designers and engineers have come together to produce our beautiful Virgin Galactic spaceship, Enterprise, creating the best and safest possible experience for each and every astronaut. Our spaceship has been specifically designed with many large windows, allowing you to see over 1,000 miles in any direction. The spacious cabin will also maximize the out-of-seat, zero-gravity experience in a safe environment. Safety and customer experience are, after all, what Virgin's all about. Virgin's global transportation businesses have enjoyed formidable safety records, and Virgin Galactic will be no exception. After a thorough and exhaustive test flight program and FAA licensing, Virgin Galactic will be launched.
One of my passions or reason for wanting to fly in space is based on what these guys that do it say. And they don't say it just after flying. They talk about it for the rest of their lives, about wow, that was life-changing even. And I'm just tired of hearing it. I got to do it myself.
The rocket motor ride is a minute and a half or so, and it's exhilarating. It's like nothing else you've ever done. When that motor does shut down, the vibrations go away, and you get this instant karma of weightlessness. It's a thrill, and it all happens just like that. This black void that's space. It's a mystery, but you get a sense of its majesty as well. And separating these two extremes is this thin blue electric ribbon of light. That's the atmosphere. You cannot appreciate the experience just by looking at a magazine cover, just what it is like to take it in with your own eyes. And everything you feel in your body is the same way. It's wow.
Virgin Galactic's technology will not only be safe, it will also be clean. Our vehicles are constructed from light and strong carbon composite materials. The spaceship is released from the air, not launched from the ground, and is almost completely reusable. It has a hybrid rocket motor, which operates for only a short period and is completely free from toxic materials. The controlled glide back to the spaceport requires no fuel at all. The project has reached and passed many important milestones. We have a truly inspiring design for our home at Spaceport America in New Mexico. Our first Virgin Galactic astronauts are booking their own place in history as pioneers of a new space age and for them, the journey has already started. I've had some incredible adventures in my lifetime, and space is sure to be the greatest one of all. I am going, and I hope you will be joining me.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. You notice that I'm syncing my lips exactly as I speak, which is obviously we can take people to space, but getting the video right is sometimes hard. So anyway, as they say, I'm the only thing between you and your lunch, and I often find I'm put in that position, actually, and I think it's because people assume this is quite a cool subject, so you're either going to stay awake or stay hungry for a little longer than you'd otherwise do. So, but I will try and move forward fairly quickly. It's really great to be here with Google. We've done a lot of quite interesting stuff with Google. We've even flirted with the Virgil brand in the past, and there was a little announcement a couple of years ago, which happened to be on April the 1st, to say that Virgil were looking for volunteers to get a one-way ticket to Mars, to set up a new human community on Mars, and it would be one way. They would never be able to come back again. It was on April the 1st, but what it did show, actually, was a lot of people were willing to do that. We had a lot of applications, which is sort of useful. And I'll talk a little bit about Virgin and some similarities, perhaps, with what else we've been hearing about this morning. So, yes, that was what I was going to say, actually. I think Google came up with my title rather than me. You know, so I'm not sure I would be quite as gutsy as that, but, you know, Virgin and Google, I think, tend to be far-sighted, so I'm happy to stay with that title of redefining long-haul travel, because that's something, I guess, that if we get these first few steps right, that I'll explain in a moment, we'll hopefully see in not too long a time. Now, life at Galactic is pretty exciting. Funnily enough, you know, we're sitting on Piccadilly today. So you've got BAFTA, you've got the Ritz, you've got the Wolseley, you've got Fortnum & Masons. But I hope in the future that Piccadilly will also be known for the fact that there's a little street just off it down on the right-hand side called Half Moon Street. And that is where the world's first commercial space line started. So we're at number 6 if you ever want to come and visit us. And hopefully there'll be a big blue plaque on the wall one day, because what we're doing, if we get it right, is going to change history. And let me just tell you just very quickly about some of the things that have happened in just in the last couple of months. You know, this is a project where you know, personally speaking, I started 6 years ago as the first employee, and I don't think I've ever woken up since that first day without feeling extremely motivated and really happy about what I'm doing, because it is an important project, and the most amazing thing about it in some ways is that it's going well. So, for example, just in the last couple of months, we closed our first external investment deal. We were able to secure $280 million from a very sophisticated and an active Middle Eastern investor called Abba. And, you know, this was unprecedented in the field of commercial space. And it's important because if we're going to be able to do the things that we think we need to do in space in the future to meet some of our big challenges down here on Earth, then we're going to need the support of the private sector. So whether this was the Netscape moment or not, I don't know, but it did value Virgin Galactic at almost $1 billion, and that's, you know, a little time before we take our first passenger to space. Then we had another great day down in New Mexico just a few weeks ago when we had the soft opening of Spaceport America. It was the dedication of the 10,000-foot runway and for chance for people to see the fantastic Foster & Partners terminal building, which is taking shape down there. And it was one of those moments which really, I guess, I actually stood on the second floor of the world's first commercial purpose-built spaceport and looked down the taxiway at the world's first commercial manned spaceship. And you have to pinch yourself, you know, that this is real, it's very real, because, you know, going back a few years, these two gentlemen here, the one on the right is probably familiar, the one on the left is the governor of New Mexico, Bill Richardson, and they had a very simple conversation. Bill Richardson said, if you build a spaceship, I'll build a spaceport, and Richard said, well, if you build me a spaceport, I'll build a spaceship. And, you know, the deal was done on a handshake, and 5 or 6 years later, you know, we stood in that amazing building, and that spaceship is really flying overhead them. We didn't stick that on the photo to make it look better. It's a real shot. And there's another great shot, actually, of the spaceship just flying overhead the 10,000-foot runway down in the desert of New Mexico at Spaceport America. And then we flew our Spaceship 2, VSS, Virgin Spaceship Enterprise, for the first time solo. Quite a heart-stopping moment. Just a few weeks ago, this was the first time the world's first commercial manned spaceship had ever been let go from its carrier aircraft. We were pretty sure it was going to fly, and fortunately it did. The pilots came down with big smiles on their faces, said, "She flies beautifully, let's do it again." We've done it twice since, and again have had flawless flights. So, you know, it's been a really exciting couple of months, and, you know, as I say, some real pinch-me moments as we progress on this amazing subject. But let me just take a step back, because I think it's important. We've been talking a lot about brands this morning, and Virgin, you know, I hope is one of the brands that at least some of you love and none of you hate. But it is, you know, without doubt, one of the world's major brands. And, you know, it was my first job, Virgin Galactic, at Virgin. I'd obviously sort of knew about Virgin. I always thought it might be quite a nice place to work, and I got a chance to do it, and it has been a nice place to work. And I've looked at the Virgin brand, and there's a few things, as I've worked at quite a high-profile end of this group, that have struck me about it. The first is that this would never have been British Airways Galactic. You know, it would never have happened. It needed a brand and a set of values and an attitude to go into a business like this. And indeed, I guess you could argue that about a lot of the other businesses that Virgin is involved in. You will know a lot about Virgin already, but it's 200 companies, I think about $18 billion now in branded revenue, about 50,000 employees, and of course it started off with one man trying to sell records out of a phone box. And, you know, I don't know necessarily all the secrets, but there's a couple of things that I have observed about Virgin that I think have helped to make it this extraordinary brand, where you can stick Virgin really as the prefix to just about any business, and it may not always be successful, but it will give its customers a very clear impression of the style of service. It's not about a product, it's the way it's delivered. And these are a few things that I've learned. Firstly, that, you know, it's a very entrepreneurial structure. There is no monolithic head office anywhere. You know, the Virgin companies are all separate companies. We tend to keep them small, believing that small it's better to be smaller and best rather than larger and mediocre. And one of the reasons that small companies work, in our view, is because the people that really make the difference, the people that are actually dealing with the customers, you know, can feel more proud of their product. And, you know, we do a lot of things to try and make sure that nothing interrupts. There's nothing in between people and the pride in their products. And keeping companies small certainly helps with that. The other reason that this separate structure works well is because you can tolerate failure. It's a very entrepreneurial structure. You know, if Virgin Galactic doesn't work, I think it's going to work, but if it doesn't, you know, it's not going to bring the rest of the Virgin Group crashing down. And although we've had a lot of successes, we also have failure, and we're not afraid of that. The other thing that I've always heard about Virgin is that we're great at PR, and, you know, I don't know whether we are or not, but that's what everybody says about us. And, you know, I've sort of tried to look at that and understand what it means over the years. And, you know, one of the things that it does strike me is that I think that for us, PR should be changed round the other way to RP, that you know, that the good PR is actually having a relationship with your public. And it's maybe easier said than done, but in my view and our view, I think that, you know, good relationships, it doesn't matter really whether they're with the public or with your wife or husband or children. You know, good relationships always depend on certain criteria. And one of those things is of course, communication. And so you will notice from Virgin that we tend to announce early. And then the other thing is how you deal with the bad times. And so we tend to announce early, and then we tell the story warts and all. You know, and I think the real strength of PR, or the relationship with the public, is the way that you deal with the bad news. And there will always be bad news. You know, we deal in transportation businesses, and you know, they're very, you know, there are risks attached to that. You know, you can do everything that you can to make sure that your vehicles and your operations are safe, whether they're space vehicles, air vehicles, or trains. But sometimes something will happen, and it's how you deal with that. You know, we had a train accident a couple of years ago, and you probably noticed that, you know, that Richard moved heaven and earth to make sure that he was standing by the side of that railway in a very, very remote location in Cumbria the very next morning. And, you know, when asked why, he said, well, if my kids had been on that train, I would expect the owner to be there the next morning. I mean, contrast that, and I'm not making any judgments here, but contrast that with the way other people have handled these sort of things, BP, for example, with the oil spill, and maybe have a look at what Rolls-Royce now are doing with the issues with the A380 engine. You know, and it all comes back, in our view, to really understanding that PR is about having a relationship with your public. And a good example, I suppose, of how we've done that, and another element of Virgin's business ethos in the past has been about taking on the big guys. You know, if there is a market out there where there is clearly public demand which is being poorly served, why not have a go? It doesn't matter how big it is. Now, when we launched Virgin Atlantic back in 1984, it was pretty much on the basis that Richard had done a lot of traveling transatlantic and had come to the very quick conclusion it was a pretty miserable thing to do. You know, the airlines still regarded themselves as largely engineering operations which had some incidental human cargo. If you fly domestically in the US today, apart from Virgin America, you'll have pretty much the same experience. And so he said, I think I can do this better, because it's going to be, the real secret here of success in the future will be, really looking at that human cargo and making sure it's having a good time, as well as getting the engineering operation right. So he bought an aircraft at the time, started an airline, and there was an interesting little survey in Marketing Week at that point, which said, very interesting to see that a record label is starting an airline. Let's go out and see, what people think about that. And they came back and said, we knew it. You can't do this. 90% of people that were surveyed said that they didn't want to fly on an airline owned by a record label. So Richard wrote back and said, dear sir, thank you so much for undertaking that useful survey on our behalf. I'm delighted to see that 10% of the UK population will fly on my aircraft, so I'm out to buy some more, which is what he did, and the rest is history. So what about Virgin in the 21st century, which is where we come in as Virgin Galactic? Well, we've had some great brand values in the past. I've talked about some of them. There's also the adventure, that's very closely related to the story of a man. But when we looked at how we were going to make this brand survive the next 40 or 50 years, it became very clear to us, actually, that there were some huge issues out there for everybody in business. And, taking it from the top level, when I was born, I think there were about 3.5 billion people on the planet. There are now 6.7. And, by the time I go, if I live a full life, there'll probably be about 10 billion. The trouble is that even at today's figures, if we all lived the way we live, we'd need 3 planets to support our requirements. And that's only going to get worse because the numbers are increasing and they all want to live like we live, quite understandably. And so Virgin sort of had a look at this and thought, well, huge opportunity, big customer base, a lot of people wanting a lot of products, but also, massive challenge, because, if we're going to survive and thrive, all the things we do today, we're going to have to do so much better. Otherwise, it's just not sustainable, quite clearly. And so we thought, well, okay, if this is a case of industrial survival as well as maybe human species survival, we need to get on top of this. And so how do we use the brand? How do we use the values, the way people think about us, to really make sure that we're one of the winners in the future and we're helping to meet these massive challenges? And the way that we think we can help to do that is to use the brand to really showcase and invest in some cases, commercialize the cutting-edge technologies that are present in our sectors, the sectors that we operate in, that are going to be really important to our survival in the future. Let me give you an example. Again, turning to good old Virgin Atlantic, a few years ago, they sponsored this and helped build and sponsor this aircraft. And the link with space is that this aircraft was built by exactly the same people that are building our spacecraft. It was built for Steve Fossett. He flew the aircraft around the world on a single tank of fuel. A really remarkable bit of kit. And the reason that Virgin Atlantic got involved in this, great for the brand, great about adventure, maybe a little hark back to the ballooning days and so forth. But more than that, it was saying to the Boeings and the Airbuses of this world, look at this technology carefully. It's all carbon composite. There's some really smart design in here. This needs to trickle down to the way that you start to think about how you build the next generation of large aircraft. And if you take these lessons, we will be a buyer of those aircraft because, to survive in the next 20 or 30 years as an airline operator, we are going to have the most fuel-efficient planes out there. And we're starting to see that effect. And the 787, as and when it comes online, is a 50% composite aircraft, 30% more fuel efficient than anything in its class. And we're also working with GE on a sustainable jet aviation fuel. So that's a little idea of the ethos behind what got us into Virgin Galactic. Because you know, Richard, not surprisingly, had wanted to go to space for a long time. And he thought, well, if I do, there's probably a lot of other people out there do as well. You know, he remembered, just as I just about do, the 1960s, that incredible decade which started with just about nothing having been in space and ended with 2 men actually walking on the moon. I mean, a crazy, crazy period. You know, innovation like we had never seen before. And his mother at that point told him that he'd be going on holiday to the moon for a fortnight by 1985. And so he was a little frustrated that that hadn't happened. And he thought, well, if I want to go there, I'm sure a lot of other people want to go there. We did it with the airline. Let's do it with the space line. Come on, guys, let's go out and start a space line. So we went out and had a look. And we very rapidly came to the conclusion that it wasn't going to be quite as easy as buying a 747. And the reason for that is that it's one of these odd industries, maybe because of the huge amount of national prestige behind space agencies, the link with national security, you know, and the fact that space has pretty much been the preserve of government agencies for the last 50 or 60 years. You know, we found that actually, astonishingly, the technology that was used, or is used, to put the shuttle into space, to put Soyuz into space, to put satellites into space in 2004 or 5 or whatever it is, and still in 2010, was pretty much the same technology that had been used to put V2 rockets down here in London. It just hadn't changed. And it had a problem. The first was that although I guess we should respect this technology because it has been the catalyst for one of man's greatest achievements, you know, it is old. It's really old-fashioned. And it's very dirty. You know, it's very dangerous. You still have about a 1 in 100 chance of surviving as a government astronaut. And it's incredibly wasteful. You know, you look at that fantastic, you know, sort of iconic rocket ship up there, and you have to realize that the whole lot gets thrown away. Nothing is reused. And if we were to start our space line using something like that, it would be a little bit like Virgin Atlantic flying all the way to New York, dumping the 747 in the Hudson and having a new one to come back each time. And you don't make money like that. And you know, if you're going to kill maybe 1 in 120 passengers, that's also not a good way to start a business. So there was a fundamental problem, and we knew we needed something better than was out there if we were going to meet our, you know, became very quickly apparent which should be our dual objectives of transforming safety levels and transforming the economic viability of space travel. You know, we had to find a way of doing that before we started this business. Unfortunately, the gods were on our side, and if anything, you know anything about the history of commercial aviation, one of the things that really stands out was that, you know, it started first of all, obviously, with the Wright brothers, pretty much, you know, who a year before they flew eventually, one of the Wright brothers said it could be another 1,000 years before we achieved that. And then within a very, very few years, there were a lot of pilots, there were a lot of aircraft around the world. But they were primarily looked at, as far as the public were concerned, as barnstorming. You know, it was a bit of fun, no real commercial application. They were just interesting flying machines. And then people came along to say, look, let's really push this technology, and we'll do it by offering prizes. And there's just a litter of prizes going through the early 20th century, where people said, this has never been done before, everybody says it can't be done, let's offer some money and see whether it can be done. And perhaps the most famous example of that was Charles Lindbergh, who in 1927 flew the Spirit of St. Louis across the Atlantic for the first time, or the long route across the Atlantic for the first time, single-handed. And something about that started the fire, just the spark that started the fire, which led to the commercial aviation industry that we have today. And it was inspired by a prize. He wouldn't have done it had there not been money at the end of it. And a guy in the United States at the time, a few years ago, Peter Diamandis, said if it worked for aviation, why not for space? So he did exactly the same, $10 million prize, said that whoever won this prize had to design and build and fly a spacecraft up into space and back twice in the period of 14 days without any government funding. And a lot of people were very inspired by that. And the great thing about prizes is that you're not hedging your bets. You're not saying to Boeing, do this for me, or Northrop, do this for me, or anybody else specifically do this for me. It can be a guy in the garage in, you know, Basildon, or it can be one of the big providers. It doesn't matter. As long as somebody comes up with a technology that can be transforming, they've got the prize. And a lot of people decided to have a go at this, including this man here. He is called Bert Rutan. He manages a company called Scale Composites, who are now building our spaceships and also built that aircraft we looked at a little while ago. Bert is one of the few people I've met anyway that I would call a genius. He's quite a maverick. He's been responsible with his incredibly intelligent organization in the Mojave Desert for designing, building and flying some of the most innovative aircraft and spaceship now in the last 30 or 40 years. And Bert put his mind to this, and he reckoned he could do it, you know, and as we became aware, because we were up at the factory looking at the Global Flyer, the Virgin Atlantic plane, as we became aware that Bert was entering this prize with his company, and we began to see how he was thinking about it, we became very excited because we saw that there was potential there, if he was successful, for something that would transform safety levels by design and would also transform commercial viability levels by design. And this, we thought, is possibly the moment we have been waiting for. And in fact it was, because on October the 4th, 2004, this tiny spaceship, Spaceship One, flew to space for the third time. So it actually did more flights than it needed to, but it did 2 of those flights in the period of 14 days, and it won the $10 million X Prize. In the meantime, in the background, we had worked with both Paul Allen, co-founder of Microsoft, who had funded this project for about $25–30 million, which in space terms is a literal drop in the ocean, and with Bert Rutan to say, look, if you're successful in achieving this flight, winning the prize, we will commercialize or seek to commercialize this technology and launch the world's first commercial space line. So we seized the opportunity, and that's so important, that somebody is out there with these new technologies, not just to design and build them, but actually to seize the opportunity to take it to the next stage, and that's where Virgin came in. Bert Rutan, I think, as he worked towards the X Prize, was always very, very sort of confident that he'd win it. But his big issue was that he'd win it, then the spaceship would get towed or flown to the Smithsonian in DC, where it is now, and would just hang there as an interesting relic. And so, he needed somebody that had the vision, the operational experience, and also the depth of pockets, to be honest, to come along and say, okay, let's give this a go. So why is it a great system? And I'll keep this fairly short, but the design was radically different. Some of the inspiration was from the past, and I think that marks genius in some ways, and some of the inspiration just came out of thin air, or the vacuum of space, maybe. And let me tell you the 4 things that makes this system very different than anything that had gone before, which met these objectives of safety and commercial viability. The first one is that we launched from an aircraft, not from the ground. And the benefits of launching from an aircraft at 50,000 feet rather than from the ground is that it's massively more safe, probably tens of thousands of times more safer statistically, launching it in the outer edges of the atmosphere rather than the ground level with an enormous bomb. You need less fuel, it's less dangerous, it's much more fuel efficient, and if anything goes wrong in those first few seconds, in our case you've got a little space plane which will glide back down to the runway, sort out the problem, start again. If anything goes wrong when you're launching a huge rocket from the ground in the first few seconds, you're committed, and the chances of getting out alive are pretty slim. So that was the first thing, the air launch. The second thing is that we make both these vehicles, both the carrier aircraft and the spacecraft, out of carbon composite materials, and they are definitely the future of aerospace and aviation. 4 times as strong as steel and about 1/4 of the weight. Very heat resistant, don't suffer from fatigue, and without carbon composite materials we wouldn't have a business. The third thing was the propulsion that we're using. It's a hybrid rocket motor. I won't go into that in too much detail, but it runs on laughing gas and rubber. And these 2 elements are extremely safe in their own right. It's also controllable, so again you can shut that rocket motor down at any time. Apparently my time's out, which is bad news, and just glide back down to the runway. The final thing, and I'll just keep this really quick, is the way he came back into the Earth's atmosphere. That's always been a problem with spacecraft. Bert used an idea which was about making the spacecraft look like a shuttlecock, so rotating the wings so you'd always come down with the right attitude. Even if you came into space upside down, you'd turn yourself around automatically, and then those rotated wings acting as the feathers of shuttlecocks, so there's no need for heat tiles, there's no need for computerized flight control systems. Pilots do very little. 70,000 feet, wings go back, glide down to the runway, and ready to take your next group of passengers. I'm going to have to flick through now because my time is severely limited. Let me just get rid of the slides and just finish off with a few words about the business. We are now in the latter stages of test flights. The vehicles are real, they're built, they're flying. There's nobody else that's doing that. Our first market is space tourism. We needed real people to be involved in this business to inspire the community, and there are a lot of people out there that want to go to space. We set the initial ticket price at $200,000. It will come down in time, and to date we've got about 400 people that paid that $200,000 up front, so about $50–60 million of deposits in the bank, which has been so crucial in reassuring ourselves that not only do we have a great product, but we have a readily available market. This product can also be used for science in space. I think we'll build probably shortly afterwards a derivative of this product which can launch small satellites into space. And then eventually, going back to my title, you know, if we get these steps right of proving you can take ordinary people into space day after day after day, just like an airline with comparable levels of safety and make money from it, then we think we can see innovation happen very rapidly. We saw it with the internet, we saw it with the mobile telephone. You know, if you can convince the private sector there's a buck to be made, then after a long period of nothing much happening, you can see innovation happen just like that. And so our end goal, or one of our end goals, which comes back to the theme of the talk this afternoon, is being able to take people from London to Australia, London to Los Angeles, transcontinental via space. No ash cloud problems, much less environmental problems, but probably the best thing for all of us is that it would probably take a couple of hours to get to Sydney rather than, you know, whatever it takes today. So I am out of time, and I'm going to stop there. If there are any, I don't know if I can have any questions or whatever, but I'll be around for a little while if anybody wants to come and talk to me about Virgin Galactic some more. But thank you very much for your time.